Good evening and welcome to our second installment of Henry and Ribsy by Beverly Cleary. When we left off, Henry was up in the car at the gas station having an oil change, and they used to hoist cars up instead of going underneath it. So that's why he got to ride up in the car. All right. That old scooter, he thought, he needn't think he's so smart just because he got to go fishing first. Al gave the car a few more pish-tushes with the grease gun and hurried off to sell some more gas. Ribsy looked up at Henry as if he wished he would come down. "Pretty soon, fella," said Henry, wishing something would happen. Sitting up on the grease rack wasn't as much fun as he thought it would be. While Henry was wishing something would happen, a police car stopped in front of the supermarket next door to the service station. The officer got out and hurried into the market. Boy, oh boy, thought Henry. Now something's happening. Maybe somebody's holding up the supermarket. If he comes out shooting, I better duck. 3M85, stand by, blared the radio in the police car. Jeepers, thought Henry. I bet that means headquarters is going to send help. If the burglars get out and try to escape, I'm in a good place to watch where they go. Yes, sir, it's a good thing I'm up here. I'll be a lookout and keep my eagle eye on the door just in case any suspicious-looking people come out. Henry slid down in the seat and peered over the edge of the car with his eagle eye. He saw a lady with a baby in a tailor tot come out of the supermarket. She was followed by a man on crutches. Wait a minute, thought Henry. That man on crutches. Maybe the crutches are a disguise. Maybe when he gets around the corner, he'll throw them away and begin to run. I better watch him. Pish-tush went the grease gun. 13, 9, 10, meet 13A9, blared the radio in the police car. Here comes help, thought Henry. Just at that moment, Ribsy pointed his nose into the air and sniffed. Then he trotted purposefully toward the police car. Now what's Ribsy up to, wondered Henry, forgetting to keep his eagle eye on the man on crutches. The officer had not slammed the door of the police car shut when he got out. Henry was horrified to see Ribsy push it wider open with his nose and jump into the front seat. "There, Ribsy!" Henry called. "You get out of there!" The radio suddenly blared forth. 3M85, 2nd and Broadway. Frightened, Ribsy scrambled out of the car. The radio was silent. "You stay away from that police car," ordered Henry from the grease rack. Cautiously, Ribsy approached the open door of the car. "You get away from there," yelled Henry. Ribsy jumped into the police car again. "Ribsy!" Henry called desperately. Ribsy jumped out of the police car. In his mouth was a brown paper bag. Henry groaned. A dog that robs police cars. Now he was really in trouble. "Ribsy, you drop that," he ordered. Obediently, Ribsy dropped the bag. He looked at Henry, wagged his tail, and tore open the bag with his paws and teeth. Henry looked down at the pavement. It was too far to jump. Anyway, he had promised his father he wouldn't open the car door. There must be some way he could attract attention. "Say, mister," he called to Al, who was working under the car. Pish-tush went the grease gun. Pish-tush, pish-tush. "Ribsy!" yelled Henry. The dog looked up and wagged his tail. He had a sandwich in his mouth. "Drop that," ordered Henry. Ribsy swallowed the sandwich in 2 gulps and poked his nose into the paper bag again. Henry hoped the policeman would stay in the supermarket a long time. He didn't want him to see the thief who had stolen his lunch. Thinking it must be nearly time for his father to return, Henry looked anxiously up and down the street. 2 cars drove into the station, and Al hurried away to sell some more gasoline. Ribsy rolled what looked like a deviled egg out on the sidewalk. He sniffed it and then gobbled it up. "Oh, how do you like that?" thought Henry. At home he doesn't like the eggs he's supposed to eat to make his coat glossy. Ribsy poked his nose into the bag once more. Henry wondered what happened to dogs that stole lunches, especially policemen's lunches. At that moment, the policeman came out of the supermarket with a bag in his hand. He looked at the open door of his car. Then he saw Ribsy. "Here, you!" he shouted. Oh, what's he going to do to Ribsy? Henry wondered in alarm. Looking guilty, Ribsy picked up the paper bag and ran between the gasoline pumps. The policeman ran after him. "Come back here," he yelled, and tripped on the hose from the pump. Ribsy ran under the car that was getting gas. "Come on out from under there," ordered the policeman. Al hung the hose on the pump, and the driver of the car started the motor. The sound frightened Ribsy into running out. "Oh, I sure wish I could get out of here," thought Henry. "Why doesn't Dad hurry up and come back?" "I'll head him off," Al called to the officer. Ribsy, followed by Al and the policeman, ran around behind the station where Henry could not see him. He listened to 2 pairs of feet running back and forth on the cement and wondered desperately what would happen next. Ribsy appeared from behind the station and raced around to the air and water hose, where he dropped the bag and looked at the policeman. Henry did not know whether to yell or just slide down in the car and hide. When the policeman was within a few feet of him, Ribsy picked up the bag, dashed past its owner, and ran under the grease rack. As the policeman ran after him, Henry was horrified to see him put his hand on the gun on his hip. "Don't shoot," begged Henry. "Please don't shoot my dog." Surprised, the policeman stopped alongside the grease rack and looked all around to see where the voice was coming from. "I'm up here," said Henry in a small voice. "Please don't shoot my dog. I know he shouldn't have stolen your lunch, but please don't shoot him." The policeman looked startled to see Henry peering out of the car above his head. "I'm not going to shoot your dog," he said kindly. "I'm just trying to get my lunch back if there's anything left of it." "Oh, I saw you put your hand on your gun and I thought, well, I was just trying to keep it from flopping against me when I ran," explained the officer. Just the same, Henry could not help feeling Ribsy had had a narrow escape. "I'm afraid there isn't much left of your lunch, sir," said Henry politely. Then, to Henry's relief, Mr. Huggins returned. "What's the trouble?" he wanted to know when he saw the policeman talking to Henry. "I just stopped into the market to buy a pint of milk to drink with my lunch," began the officer, and went on to explain what had happened. A pint of milk? There hadn't been a holdup at all. Henry was disappointed to learn that the policeman had been on such an uninteresting errand. An old pint of milk. Well, he supposed policemen had to drink milk like anyone else. Mr. Huggins snapped his fingers at Ribsy, who came out from under the grease rack. Looking guilty, he dropped the tattered bag at Mr. Huggins's feet. Part of a cupcake rolled out onto the cement. "Not much left, is there?" said Mr. Huggins. Then he looked at Ribsy. "Aren't you ashamed of yourself?" Ribsy's tail and ears drooped. Henry could see his dog really was ashamed. He hoped the policeman noticed how sorry he looked. "What happens to dogs that rob police cars?" Henry asked. Do they get arrested or get a ticket or something?" The policeman laughed. "No, nothing like that, but he'll probably get a stomachache from eating too much." Henry was so relieved to know that nothing serious would happen to Ribsy that he was able to grin at the officer. "And it'll serve him right if he does get a stomachache," he said. After Mr. Huggins had insisted on paying for the lunch, the officer drove away and Al lowered the car. "You old dog," said Henry crossly as Ribsy jumped into the front seat. "Look at the trouble you got me into. Now you've got grease on your tail. Mom isn't going to like that." But when Henry looked up at Henry and wagged his tail, as if he wanted to be forgiven, Henry could not help patting him. Mr. Huggins looked thoughtful. "It seems to me that dog has been getting into a lot of trouble lately," he remarked. "I know he has, but he's still a pretty good dog," said Henry. On the way home, the sight of the Rose City Sporting Goods reminded Henry of salmon fishing once more. "Say, Dad," he said, "I was talking to Scooter McCarthy. He went fishing last year and caught a silverside. I bet I land a Chinook. I bet—" "Wait a minute," interrupted Mr. Huggins. "I didn't say for sure I'd take you fishing. I said, we'll see." "Aw, Dad," protested Henry, "that's just the same as yes." Mr. Huggins was silent a minute before he went on. "You know, Henry, I've been thinking it over, and I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll make a bargain with you about the fishing trip." "What kind of a bargain?" Henry asked, wondering what his father had in mind. He hoped it wasn't anything too hard because he wanted very much to go on that fishing trip. "If you keep Ribsy out of trouble between now and the time I go salmon fishing around the middle of September, I'll take you along," said Mr. Huggins. "And that means no complaints from the neighbors about him." "Sure!" exclaimed Henry. "It's a bargain." So that was all his father wanted. Why, that would be easy as pie. He didn't have a thing to worry about. All he had to do was keep his eye on his dog from now until the middle of September, less than 2 months. He patted Ribsy, who was leaning out the front window of the car. "You're going to be a good dog from now on, aren't you?" Ribsy wagged his greasy tail in Henry's face. "Woof," he said. "That's a good dog," said Henry. He was sure he wouldn't have any trouble keeping his bargain if he watched Ribsy every minute. He couldn't get into trouble, could he? Or could he? There was the time Ribsy ran off with the roast that the neighbors were going to barbecue in the backyard. And the time he stole the 17 newspapers Scooter McCarthy had delivered on Klickitat Street. Maybe keeping Ribsy out of trouble until the middle of September wasn't going to be so easy after all, now that he stopped to think about it. And the more Henry thought about it, the more he wished he hadn't been in such a hurry to tell Scooter he was going fishing. And let's leave Henry here for the night with this. And yeah, if you're wondering about my hair, I'm blue without you. Have a good weekend. Good night.